Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Baycrest Behavioral Support Rounds. My name is Anita, and I'm a knowledge broker at the Ontario CLRI at Baycrest, and I'll be stepping in for Kara today. Today's session will focus on crisis management. Before we get started, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. Although we are meeting virtually, we acknowledge that Baycrest and our related Toronto Central Behaviour Support programs operate on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations, which have cared for the land for thousands of years, including the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat peoples, and we recognize the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This land remains home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land today. You may live and work in different territories, so we encourage you to reflect on the land on which you are located and to consider your relationship to the land and to the people who are the traditional keepers of the land. Next, I'd like to review some participation guidelines. This session is being recorded and will be archived on the Ontario CLRI and BSO websites. Your microphone is automatically muted. We will have 40 minutes of presentation time, followed by 15 minutes of discussion and a wrap-up. Please place any questions you have in the Q&A or chat box. If you have questions related to tech support, please message Agnes, who is listed as telehealth. For those of you who are interested in receiving a certificate of attendance, please enter your name and email address in the completed evaluation form that you will receive at the end of the webinar. I would now like to introduce our speakers. Iris Castillo is a social worker for Crisis Outreach Support Services for Seniors. Iris started her career as a child and youth worker, working with children and adolescents. She then took on a role as a supervisor in a group home setting, working with teens struggling with mental health. Her love and commitment to children and adolescent mental health led to a career as a counselor. After this wonderful long career, Iris continued supporting children and families through court-appointed supervised visits with clients and their children. Her love for social work continued by working with adults struggling with mental health and addictions. Shortly after, Iris proceeded to obtain her master's degree, continuing her work with older adults experiencing various psychosocial issues. Hence, this led to obtaining a career with Wood Green Community Services as a social worker for the crisis team. We also have Natalia Alendez presenting, who is a psychogeriatric specialist for the Full Circle team. Natalia has diverse experience working with individuals from all walks of life. She cares deeply about supporting older adults and seniors experiencing various psychosocial issues and is humbled by opportunities to make positive impact in their lives. Some of Natalia's work experiences include working with refugees, unhoused populations, victims of motor vehicle accidents, as well as teaching abroad in Shanghai, China. Most recently, Natalia spent 2 years on Wood Green's Crisis Outreach Service for Seniors team. She currently works on Wood Green's Full Circle team, where she provides long-term support to adults and seniors in the community. And now I will hand it over to Iris and Natalia to begin their presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Wonderful to see here everyone on the panel. I'm Iris, the social worker for the crisis team. I will hand over the presentation to Natalia, the first piece of the crisis role. Just give me 1 second. I think we have a little echo in the background.
Sorry, it's Agnes. Are you both in the same room? Okay, yeah. That's what's causing the echo. Can I just get one of you to mute? And Natalia, if you're speaking, you can unmute, and then Iris, you can stay on mute. Okay, Natalia, you can unmute your microphone.
We're just pulling up the video.
Okay, so one person can stay on mute because that's what's causing the echo.
Okay, sorry about that. Good afternoon, everyone. I don't know if the echo is better now or is it worse?
It's actually worse. So if you both have speakers on, I need you to mute and turn one speaker off and just keep one speaker on and one microphone on.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Natalia Alendez. Thank you for the introductions. I'm going to start by providing an overview of the COSS program and a little bit on how it works. So we'll start with the COSS overview. I'll discuss what a COSS assessment looks like. And then Iris will go into a specific case study and discuss how the crisis was managed. And then we'll end off with a period for questions. So what is COSS? Crisis Outreach Service for Seniors, also known as COSS, is a mobile crisis intervention and outreach service for seniors who are living in the community. It provides short-term response 365 days a year, 7 days a week, 9 to 5 p.m. through in-person support. So when a referral is first made, every effort is made to make direct in-person contact, either the same day or the next day, and this is just depending on the level of urgency. Consent for service is not required to make a referral and is instead obtained at the visit. When it comes to the referral and intake process, COSS is a low barrier service. It aims to be responsive and flexible, and anyone can make a referral to COSS. It's not limited to solely service or healthcare providers. It could be a friend, it could be a family member, a neighbor, a landlord. We've had clergy members call in to make referrals. It's really anyone who is concerned about a senior and believes that they might be in crisis and are needing more support. And of course, the senior client themselves can also make a referral by calling the Toronto Seniors Helpline. So the referral is done by calling the helpline. It's available Monday to Friday, 9 to 8, as well as weekends between 10 and 6. And for anyone who is not a native English speaker, when they call that number, they can also just state which language they like, and an interpreter will then be used to complete the referral over the phone. So the COSS program is offered through a partnership between Home and Community Care Support Services, Toronto Central, Wood Green, Reconnect, South Riverdale Community Health Center, as well as LOFT. And these different agencies collaborate and work together to ensure that service is provided across the East, West, and North regions of the City of Toronto. The COSS East team specifically is managed by Wood Green. So just to give you an idea of what the team looks like, it's made up of a senior manager, a team lead, 5 to 6 registered social workers, relief staff who support with crisis visits, because again, crisis visits take place every single day. We also have a behavioral consultant on board and a nurse practitioner. We're also fortunate to work with a geriatric psychiatrist who's available for consults as well as home visits. So COSS eligibility and population of focus. So the population that COSS services are adults over 65, and it services any senior with an M postal code. There are exceptions that are made for those who are 55 to 64, and this is on a case-by-case basis. So for example, those with a geriatric presentation, such as cognitive impairment, chronic health issues, or mobility challenges. COSS typically serves individuals who have a suspected or diagnosed mental health or substance use issue, dementia and responsive behaviors, as well as those who are frail, isolated, or marginalized, or at risk, especially of homelessness or repeated hospitalizations. COSS usually serves those who have historically been hard to service or hard to reach. And COSS really prides itself on going to crisis visits and building rapport very quickly with seniors who may have had previous negative experiences with the healthcare system. And of course, COSS also aims to provide support to the family and caregivers of such clients. And in terms of restrictions, COSS does not service clients in long-term care. We will support clients in retirement homes. And we don't typically support clients in shelters, but again, this is assessed on a case-by-case basis. There are some occasions where we have gone into shelters to support seniors. COSS scope of support. So this graph illustrates the overall scope of support. And as you can see here, when a referral is made, there are two different avenues that can be taken. So intake staff at Toronto Seniors Helpline can decide that a referral warrants a crisis visit. And in this case, they'll schedule a visit for the next available date, ideally within 1 or 2 days. On that date, a team of 2 social workers will go out to visit the client in person, and they'll conduct a crisis assessment. If the client is in need of support and is consenting to service, then they are assigned a social worker from the team, and that worker provides intensive case management that's typically between 6 to 8 weeks. So it is short term, but the case management involves things like referrals, advocacy, coordination, connection to primary care, and really tries to find out what the primary crisis goals are and completes those goals before transitioning to longer term supports. So if after the end of this short-term period, the client still requires support, they can be transferred to long-term case management, either in different agencies in the community or within Wood Green. And I'll share a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. The other avenue that can be taken is a referral can be directed to a consultation. So this is usually when the client is not or may not be eligible for COSS, and further assessment is needed to determine eligibility. But a consult is also a way for the COSS team to provide guidance, information, and resources to anyone who is just looking for some additional support regarding a senior who might be in crisis. Okay, so looking at the COSS assessment, it's important to note that COSS works from a client-centered approach. So, we really value respect and dignity, and making sure that clients are informed about the care they're receiving, and that they have that they're involved in decision-making as much as they choose to be, and that they have a say in identifying the goals and the service needs at that initial visit. And when conducting an assessment, the team assesses for various factors that may be contributing to the crisis at hand. So this includes mental health and substance use, cognition, physical health, ADLs and IADLs, the presence and the level of formal and informal supports. So whether they have a doctor, if they're connected to a psychiatrist, if they have family who are involved, friends, neighbors, things like that. We also look at housing and environment. So what kind of housing they're in, if there's any environmental issues such as pests or hoarding, if they've gone into arrears, if they're at risk of eviction. And then we'll look at risks to the client, specifically related to seniors issues. And it's really important that the crisis team goes into the client's home environment whenever possible. And for the most part, this is what we do because it provides a really good snapshot of that individual's present well-being. So instead of just relying on verbal feedback from a client, going into the home really allows workers to observe and take a look around and see exactly how that client's living and assess whether there is a crisis situation at hand. So for example, for food security, the team can go in and assess the kitchen, take a look inside the fridge. Is there food? Does the food seem to be going bad? We can look around for any safety devices that are in the home or any risks that are apparent in the home or safety hazards. When it comes to physical health, instead of just asking the client, we can also take a look at their medications. Have they been taking their medications regularly? Does it seem like they're forgetting or not taking them consistently? And it's also important to take a look at how the client is ambulating in the home. So how are they able to move around and navigate their home space? Do they seem frail? Does it seem like it's very difficult for them to move around? And we can see what kind of mobility devices they have as well. So looking at a client on all these different levels by both asking questions and actually observing the environment and how that person interacts with the environment, we get a better idea of that individual's needs, the level of the crisis, as well as the strengths that the client already has. So geriatric considerations. So there are geriatric specific factors that we take into account, especially when deciding whether or not a client requires urgent stabilization case management. So cognition is a major consideration. And just a note, we are not capacity assessors. However, the COSS team does do some mini memory testing when they're at the visit, and they can flag for potential impairment, poor decision making, as well as any potential symptoms of dementia. And if a COSS worker isn't involved with supporting a client, they can help manage a crisis that may be related to cognition by referring to our nurse practitioner for further cognitive testing, as well as connecting folks with capacity assessors should they need that type of testing. ADLs and IADLs. So this is a crucial part of the assessment because, again, it gives us such an intimate look into our client's well-being and day-to-day functioning. So we want to look at ADLs like personal hygiene, eating and ambulating. We also assess IADLs. So we ask about shopping, like how is the client able to go out and purchase their groceries or purchase needed items? Are they able to manage housekeeping tasks? What about food preparation? Is that something that they can do independently? Managing finances is a big one. Are they able to pay their bills and pay their rent on time? Have they done their taxes? So a client may tell us one thing. So they may tell us that, yes, they're managing personal care, they're eating well. But again, if we notice at the visit that they're unkempt, they're frail, there's no food in the home, this alerts us to a potential crisis, and we have to kind of dig deeper and ask more questions and talk to other people to find out what exactly is going on. Often issues with cognition are evident when individuals are unable to manage these ADLs and IADLs. So an example is when a senior with cognitive decline stops paying their rent and ends up facing eviction. That's something that we see quite often on crisis. Okay, so more risks that are connected to geriatric considerations. So one specific risk that can present itself or lend itself to a crisis is elder abuse. It is something that we see from time to time on crisis. And of course, elder abuse includes neglect, emotional, physical, and financial abuse, as well as unit takeovers. And this is sometimes can be very complicated and tricky to deal with because at times clients will overlook certain behaviors that we would consider elder abuse because they're getting some of their needs met, whether that's food delivery or companionship. So that can be a difficult one to address. Another issue, as mentioned, is cognitive decline. It can lead to things like physical health complications, failure to thrive, financial concerns, and unsafe living conditions. Social isolation is a big one. It's another concern because it's a risk factor for depression. And as we know, formal and informal supports are protective factors, but a lot of the clients that we see often have minimal or no supports in place. So they may not have family involved or who are willing to support, or they may not have friends or neighbors who can assist them. A lot of times clients don't even have a family doctor. And the other issue is that sometimes clients are fearful of formal supports. They may have had previous negative experiences with the formal healthcare system, or they may have a fear that they're going to be taken to long-term care against their will. And so there's a reluctance to accept certain supports. So with COSS, it's really about building rapport, building trust, and taking small steps and encouraging clients to accept supports that they may need and to just feel more comfortable about receiving different types of supports. And then finally, alcohol and substance misuse is another major risk because it can contribute to dementia and also worsen mental health concerns. But a lot of times clients who are struggling with social isolation will turn to things like alcohol and substance use to cope with their feelings of loneliness and isolation. So trying to get clients connected to a social support network is a huge part of addressing a crisis and ensuring that a crisis doesn't happen again to them. And unless, Iris, you want to add anything else? If not, you can go into the case study.
Thank you for that wonderful synopsis, Natalia. I do want to add a little piece to this around some of the behaviors that we do see and experience on the visit. Sometimes it's a situation where the behavior is completely out of control and the client requires the supports of EMS, the supports of maybe the MCIC team. So we do reach out to various teams for extra supports. I wanted to make sure I point that out. But in our discussion, as we're moving to the case study, we're going to talk a little bit about a case that is quite complex. So it's a little bit different than the usual cases where we direct to home and community care, provide meals on wheels. Some of these cases are very complex and it requires various parties, agencies to be involved. It does take time. So even though we have 6 to 8 weeks to provide the supports, it does extend sometimes over that period. So the scenario with this particular case study is Mr. Smith is a 60-year-old man who actually has just received the onset of Alzheimer's. He's quite fearful, he's depressed. There's many issues that have presented itself. He was the superintendent of the home where he's living at. So he provided supports for a short period of time at the building that he's currently living. However, he got fired from the position that he was in, and he required the supports of the community legal services. Unfortunately, because he was the superintendent of the building, he was not able to receive these supports, and therefore I represented him in the court, so at the LTV hearing. And that hearing took place at the end of October. So I was only able to manage extra time for him to the end of basically this month. We did have a previous court hearing at the end of January. The client really indicated, you know, I'm just not able to pay the rent. I have my health issues, but also he has a wife who has serious mental health issues. She's been diagnosed with schizophrenia. She also is struggling with taking medication. She's diabetic. So there's a lot of factors that are affecting the client. And so he mentioned on top of these complications, there's also the issue that he is not receiving a full amount of his CPP and OAS. So basically what's transpired is he's only receiving about $350 a month due to the fact that he has old child support payments. So part of the work that took place was not only to support him in the LTB hearing, but also have our nurse practitioner meet with his wife, do a further assessment of her cognition, but also connect with the ombudsman to be able to support him around the deductions that he's receiving from, like I think I mentioned, it was only $350. So we were able to be successful. He got his checks back. However, there is a court proceeding in future where he does have to outline what type of support payments he might be able to make. But he is receiving the full amount right now of his OAS. And he was quite happy. But there were other complications that took place. Because he has Alzheimer's, he had his license taken away. And so he did not proceed with stop in his driving. He just continued driving. And he mentioned because he's just so frustrated, depressed, and anxious, he also got his wallet stolen. And he's missing his ID. So that was another step to take him to the ID clinic to work with him on that. We did have copies of his ID, which was helpful. But he also was fearful because he got his van broken into. So there were a lot of unfortunate events that occurred, which accelerated his anxiety. He started to drink more. Sometimes the behavior was based on just sheer frustration. When I would call, he wouldn't return my call. I had to do a wellness check. We had the EMS do wellness checks as well. So we reached out to the paramedics. Unfortunately, the wife had opened the door at the original visit, and she said, I'm really not interested in any supports. She was quite adamant of not having the supports of the home and community care team, for example, even though they had a nurse practitioner come in and try to support her. She declined. She was open to our nurse practitioner, had a very nice conversation, but she does require these extra supports. And given the situation that they're going to be evicted, it just posed more difficulty emotionally. Although the client, her husband, did not show in the beginning that he had addiction issues, it certainly was accelerated with all the difficulties that kept on presenting. And he was continuously fearful of the landlord. He talked about the fact that they were not supportive at all, didn't understand the situation. He broke down and expressed sheer frustration with the system. And these are some of the things that come up with clients who feel the system doesn't support them. It's easier, I think, when a client has all the information in front of them. When they have other support systems in place, it becomes a little more complex when support systems are just not available for the client in the way that we hope. And in this particular case, although he said he didn't want to harm himself, he was from time to time indicating how unsure he was about his whole life. So making it very clear, although I don't want to hurt myself, I'm just not sure how things are going to end up for me, for my wife, but I'm trying to stay strong for her, trying to really stay together, because that was a big issue. A great part of my role was to seek out the various supports. Could I have the home and community care team address the issue of maybe long-term care? So there were various options that were brought to the table. Unfortunately, they decline these supports. So there's a lot of risk factors that we're looking at consistently. You might turn off one fire, put down one area, and then another area comes up. So, both of these clients were at immediate risk of the eviction, right? And how do we resolve that? Then the issue of not taking the medication, a further breakdown for the wife, and even more alcohol intake, because the husband is extremely anxious. So the dependency was very high. I noticed on a few visits that he was purchasing more alcohol. He also struggled a great deal with just finding funds to be able to move, getting last month's rent. That's a big issue. Also just finding enough for food. So part of the COSS team to provide some of these supports is with funds, is with gift cards for food, gift cards for other supports, whether it is for rental arrears. So these are large risk factors that are affecting the client, and they come at different levels, right? And some of the crisis management that we do, as I mentioned before, it's not always quite clear, because it's always evolving. So this case presents itself right away with the biggest risk factor, which is the eviction. And normally you would say, okay, we'll proceed with legal supports from the community legal clinic. But what if they disagree and they say, no, we cannot provide that support because of certain circumstances? So with connecting the client to these community supports was unsuccessful. So we have to step in, switch another hat, and do the best that we can in order to voice the client's situation. A strong advocacy skill is required. Some of the things that I did was connecting his wife to our nurse practitioner to get a better idea of her cognition, not just the mental health, how she was presenting. Also the client to be encouraged to have follow-up support with his family doctor. He had a CT scan that he needed to have, but he was hesitant. He was having difficulty sleeping. He just was too anxious to make these things happen. So our nurse practitioner was assisting the client in this process to connect with the family doctor. The other piece was connecting the client to the ombudsman, as I mentioned before, because of the child support payments that were necessary to take place. And it was a large amount that was being deducted from his OAS. The other part was connecting the client to the Family Responsibilities Office, because the two levels of support there was a coordination. We really needed to discuss, why is this amount necessary to be deducted? We understand that there is an amount that needs to be deducted, but such a large amount. So it's a lot of negotiation with various agencies. It's a lot of work that is required to sometimes go above and beyond, right? Because if you don't address one area, it'll be like a ripple effect and affect other areas. We're looking at connecting the client to a housing worker. That was a big one, because it is an urgent matter. Although we've completed some application forms, the client and his wife for housing with Woodgreen, there's also the complications of the taxes for some clients that aren't done. Also the ID, it's required to have ID. So these are all the extra complications that sometimes come with cases that in one way they present at the beginning, okay, we can go to A, we can go to B, but unfortunately other areas come up. The other piece was connecting the client to the food bank, providing the client also with some funds, as I mentioned, the PC cards, extra funds for clothing. Sometimes they need their ID, the Ontario ID, so they need to pay about $35 to get that, and they may not have that. So all these various situations really bring about a lot of coordination, right? A lot of agencies become involved. Sometimes it is difficult because the client will say, I do want A and B supports, but I'm not open to C and D. And we do have to, have the consent of the client to proceed further, but sometimes it just requires a lot of encouragement, a lot of support to proceed to the next level. As Natalia had mentioned, clients sometimes are open to maybe just one simple thing, like just activate Meals on Wheels, and then we build that rapport, and then we see that the client is more open because they're fearful of various things. Like with this particular case, they don't want to be separated as a couple. She doesn't want to proceed to long-term care. He's not open at this time to look at other avenues. He's very adamant they want to stay together. They were both crying. It's very emotional at the same time, right? To be working with a client who has various factors affecting their emotions, how they're going to reach out to what is normal to them. It could be alcohol, it could be a drug, it could be a particular behavior, is what helps them to navigate day by day. So these are some of the things we continue to connect clients to. And in this particular case, I continue to work with the client, connecting him to the Alzheimer's Society, connecting the client to the Gernstein Crisis Center, if in fact he feels that he really needs something more immediate. Because my concern was in how he was presenting. Like I said, although he did not say he wanted to hurt himself, but he was leading to that. And that is something we also have to prepare for as crisis workers. Although you may have A, B, and C as outlined, we also have to prepare what might be ahead. So some of these supports continue to make calls to the family doctor with the nurse practitioner support, additional tests for him, and also for his wife. What else can be done? So even though I presented in the very beginning with one case, I ended up with 2 clients, and that's what happens sometimes at the crisis level. Is you assess for one, but then something else comes up, and I always say it's like Pandora's box that's opened. And we see a different presentation, an additional presentation. The other piece that I did was connect the client to respite supports. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult because there isn't a bed available, but we certainly do our best to kind of put supports in various places should a fire come up in one particular area or another. And I think with this particular case study, we really want to touch back on this particular model when we look at, for example, TSH and this crisis referral step. When Natalia talked about 2 levels of support, right? Directly the crisis visit for an in-depth assessment, or consult. We have various agencies coming to us and just want to consult about a case. It's not even something where we have to go see or pick up the case. They're just concerned about the client, would like some other ideas of how to address the issue. I think we all need supports. We need a new view of things. We all have wonderful skills, and I think that's where the consult comes in. We coordinate with our partners in the community for a successful outcome, even though it's not actually our client. So some of this, as a team, we address the main concerns when there is definitely a direction for a visit. The visit can even escalate. Let's say a family member said, my 69-year-old grandmother is really struggling. I'm not really sure what's happening. You go to the home, you assess the situation, and then you see that the client has people in the unit. And as Natalia had mentioned, unit takeovers are quite real, and they are happening a lot in the Toronto community housing. And so we need sometimes to call the MCIT team. We need to call the police in order to be safe all around, not only the client, but also ourselves, because anything could happen. There's a lot of connections with what we see sometimes, gangs. We see a lot of issues around addictions. So safety is key to the work that we do. In other situations, every case is different. I cannot say every case is similar. They're all very different, and more so, I think, as we're getting more and more cases with a lot of health issues. But we see back to this circle of the crisis. We look at how do we wrap up the crisis when we've completed maybe 8 goals. And there are other goals that need to be worked on. And we look at that particular area in transferring the case, whether it's to the Wood Green team, the social work department, or the full circle, because they're a little bit more long-term. Because we are 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes we might go over a little bit more, but we really work in partnership with our other team members to really transfer the case for more long-term supports. And I'm so happy to have Natalia here because she is the full circle social worker. She has an excellent idea for our crisis team because she was in the crisis role, but also she is able to take on these clients more long-term to provide those more in-depth supports. So I'd like for her to talk a little bit more about the full circle and how we manage from the crisis to more long-term supports after we have completed the 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, thank you, Iris. So, as she mentioned, once the client is out of immediate crisis, they can be transferred to longer-term social work supports. And Wood Green actually has 2 longer-term social work supports that prioritize COSS referrals. So once that referral has been made from COSS to long-term supports, they're usually picked up within a couple of days. And this is just a way to ensure that there's no gap in service. And COSS and either the social work team or the full circle team, which I'm on, they do a warm transfer. So that just helps the client understand, what's happening with the transition. They're able to understand they're being discharged from one program, but they're moving on to the next. And there's an introduction made with the new worker. And that alleviates some of the stress around that big transition. So I'm currently working on the full circle team, which provides long-term case management between 12 and 18 months. So it's quite a long time. But as Iris mentioned, it's an opportunity to address some of the secondary goals that weren't prioritized during the crisis. So some of the things that I find myself supporting clients with is ongoing appointments. So coordination of medical appointments. Oftentimes clients have specialist appointments that they have very long wait times for. So coordinating medical appointments, legal appointments. Sometimes we can set up services that during the crisis they weren't able to afford. So once the finances have been stabilized, I can go in and set up things that weren't possible before, whether it's Meals on Wheels or even cable. Cable comes up a lot with clients because they spend so much time, alone at home. That's a really vital thing for them to have. Cable, telephone, things like that. And also just trying to build their social network. So getting them connected to different community resources, community centers, so that they can build more connections with people to reduce that isolation. And then, of course, the ultimate goal is to try to enhance clients' independence and just continue to encourage and support clients to participate and engage with the supports that were put in place. At times clients can go back into crisis, so long-term supports is really great as a way to kind of monitor clients and, look out for signs that they could potentially be going back into crisis and step in to mitigate some of those risks. And, it's just been really interesting working on both the COSS team and now long-term social work, because I kind of get to see, the full spectrum of the experience that clients go through. And it's great to see clients in a much more stable place, after they've gone through the COSS program. I find that they're much better able to manage a lot of their IADLs, which is great. And yeah, I think that's it for us. And we can take some time now to ask questions, if anyone has any.
I think there are a few questions in the Q&A section here. So one question is, I'm wondering why you don't serve clients in long-term care. There seems to be an increase of homeless residents admitting to long-term care with no external resource to help support them.
That's a very good question. Thank you for that. So One of the things that we really look at with long-term care, and this is already with the supports of the home and community care team, right? So usually they have the supports of the social worker. The clients that are there have already received the necessary supports. I think what we're looking at is more towards retirement homes, right? So some retirement homes, let's say one in particular, downtown Sumac, we've had a lot of referrals where the clients have to pay for everything. So after a certain time, their funds run out. They're in rental arrears. Also, their cognition may have decreased so much that now they are no longer able to stay where they originally were admitted to, basically. So these are the difficulties that occur. So that's why we would move more towards the retirement homes as opposed to the long-term care homes, because the supports are all in-house. So the retirement home, you would have to pay for, let's say, the meals. You would have to pay for the personal support workers. You have to pay for the cleaning. Unless they're able to get their taxes done independently or with a family member or a power of attorney or a substitute decision maker, if their cognition has declined so much, they're not able to do this anymore, and then we are able to assist or coordinate with another worker and provide those supports.
Thank you, Iris. We have another question here. They're asking, what is a unit takeover?
There's another question here that's asking, what is a unit takeover? Yeah, so a unit takeover basically happens when someone, usually someone who's known to a client, it could be a neighbor, a friend, a family member, stays at that client's unit and starts to stay there for longer and longer periods of time. So it might start out by just spending a couple nights there, but sometimes they'll pretty much overextend their stay and they'll start taking over essentially. They'll refuse to leave. So they'll start living there, but they won't contribute to rent. So they'll start living there, and sometimes clients are afraid to tell that person you need to leave, or you've overstayed your welcome. They might feel intimidated by the person. So it's essentially just having someone staying in your unit. And we've even seen families take over a senior client's unit. So it'll start with a neighbor who brings, a girlfriend or boyfriend, then they'll bring a child, and they'll start acting as if it's their home. So they'll help themselves to the client's food, sometimes even their Meals on Wheels, or and sometimes they'll offer to go and buy some items for the client, and they'll take the debit card, but then sometimes they'll take some extra money for themselves. So it's a gradual process of taking over that client's home, and it's really an invasion of their privacy and their boundaries. And it can be it's a very fearful situation for the client, because they can be very afraid to essentially kick that person out because they're afraid of the repercussions. But it's quite a serious issue, because especially if it happens in Toronto community housing, if there's one person on the lease, there shouldn't be other people living in there when it's meant for one person. Do you want to add anything?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's wonderfully put, Natalia. What I would like to add to that is this situation can bring out an eviction. So with Toronto Community Housing, for example, we do have a lot of cases that are unit takeovers, and as Natalia mentioned, it's very gradual. You can have something as a child living there, and the individual is taking care of that child while the parents are using narcotics. And this becomes a very serious situation, because then sometimes, CAS has to be called, right? So as I mentioned before, other community agencies collaborate with us to provide the best support for the senior. It does take time, because the senior is not going to say, sure, go ahead, take them out. They're dependent on these individuals for various things. And as Natalia said, isolation is a huge one, right? They want to have someone there with them. As one of my clients mentioned to me, it's okay, I'll just babysit. What else am I doing? Right? So we look into all of that, but ultimately it's what is safety, right? We have to really look at what that safety piece is, and having a really good discussion with the senior, and looking at what other supports can take place so that the client is not so isolated.
Thank you, Iris and Natalia. So we have quite a few questions coming in. I'm wondering if you could share how individuals can reach out to you or reach out to COSS.
Sorry, what was that?
We have quite a few questions coming in, but we're getting close to 3 o'clock. I was wondering if you could share how how individuals could reach out to COSS or reach out to you both directly.
Thank you. I will put this on the so TSH is the Toronto Seniors Line, and their number I'm writing down. And so I am going to be sending that now. Does everyone see that? So that's the number for the Toronto Seniors Line, 416-217-2077. And that's how you can reach us also for a consult, as we mentioned before.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Iris and Natalia. I see we're at time now, so I'll just close up now. For anyone that did have questions that were unanswered, please feel free to call the number and speak to them directly. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you to the presenter.
I see one question here by Kaylee. She's curious to know what the experience has been regarding capacity assessment in regards to the person's ability to manage their finances. Thank you so much for that. We do get quite a lot of that. And it's not an easy answer, because it varies with a variation of situational with the client. Like if they have cognition issues, not everything is exactly the same. So some individuals with dementia are pretty good with some of their finances, and they're really opposed to anyone challenging them on that. Sometimes we have clients where their capacity is quite low, so the supports of our nurse practitioner for a geriatric assessment, or the supports of the capacity assessment at the hospital. So as I mentioned before, every situation is different. Sometimes we do have the hospitals assist us with a capacity assessment around the finances, for example. Then it could be other assessments that we would need to proceed with a more detailed assessment of what exactly is happening cognitive wise with the client. So we have our nurse practitioner, or we do also have the supports of Dr. Lackman, who will be able to provide that additional support and see who else we can help us with this particular case. And sometimes it just has to go to court. Like I mentioned, it really varies depending on the situation which each client, although they may have a diagnosis, that doesn't mean that in one area they're not quite aware and they're very resistant to that other level of support. So I hope that answers your question. There's another question here about, and it's Kali, who is talking about ending up in a crisis placement in long-term care. So the long-term care has to deal with the loose ends, pay for capacity assessments and so forth. We're looking at a better solution to understand some of these healthcare services, looking at how we focus or how other services kind of focus on those financial needs, and how do we compromise. And I mean, you know, these are very good questions overall, because there isn't an easy solution for this. As I touched upon it a little bit, it requires the hospital working with us, our nurse practitioner. Sometimes a capacity assessor is held for certain clients who are more open to these assessments. The capacity for long-term care is certainly something that is done by the home and community care team. In conjunction sometimes with our nurse practitioner to really get a good overall assessment, but there's no actual clear path. You could say, you know, let's proceed with the home and community care to do a capacity assessment for long-term care. That's easy enough. But sometimes there's the additional piece where you require the nurse practitioner to do basically an assessment, geriatric assessment, and maybe there's the additional piece of psychogeriatric assessment. So we look into all of these areas, and that's what takes a little bit of time, but our hope always is to work in conjunction with the various agencies and levels of support there are out there for seniors. I think we might be out of time. I know there's more questions. Wonderful, wonderful questions. Thank you to the panel out there. Yeah, feel free to connect with us. We're happy to consult with you. Feel free to you know, send an email if you have any further questions, and we can certainly respond to them.